Hey folks, welcome to the game of the day from day 2 of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. Today we got Nodirbek, Abdusattorov, white against Fabiano, Caruana. Absolutely chaotic game, especially in the end game. We'll see what happened. Though this game is interesting right from the opening as Nodirbek starts with f4, bird opening, d5 from Caruana. He reacts in a pretty classical fashion. And white establishes knight on e5, quickly plays for this kind of bird Larsen setup with e3, b3, and so on. Here it seems like black solves all of the opening problems pretty quickly. The engine at this point says white should just go d4 and try to play some kind of stonewall. Instead, Nodirbek takes. He's looking for a different kind of structure, b3. But now black actually ends up getting a very nice position. In fact, black is already better here, just with more space in the center in this very advanced, a very natural advance on the king side with h5. So bishop f3, castles queen side, totally reasonable from Caruana. His king is actually very safe here, and he can continue pushing on the king side as well. Game sees knight c3, knight e2, rook e8. Nodirbek tries to get something going on the king side, but it's really black that is doing well in this position. Caruana takes. He could have even just played h3 right away. There was no rush to take yet, but takes here, knight e4, knight f4. Black's position here actually just stays very nice. h3, g3, now he goes g6. Maybe it could have been more ambitious here. Maybe f6 would have been stronger, just looking to open up the king side a bit faster. Eventually looking for queen c6 and d4 ideas, as this h pawn is very annoying for white's king. So the game here soon turns, and Nodirbek actually gets a pretty reasonable position. Queen a5, trades on f5, queen to c2. Players both start playing on the queen side here, queen to a4, knight d3, but it's white that kind of wants the action to happen on the queen side, as that's where black's king is located. Eventually, we end up in this heavy piece endgame, which is really double-edged, as white has this open b file, but black's h-pawn long-term, of course, is going to cause issues for white's king as well. So now Caruana goes b5, very risky decision, because after takes, now Nodirbek finds rook takes c4, nice sacrifice. If queen takes c4, then his idea is to take on on b6, king a8, and now either rook to b1 or queen a5 check. Can play queen a5 right away, king b7, and rook to b1. Here black would have to give up the queen, and this eventual endgame is definitely better for white, as white is an extra pawn, or extra couple pawns with the queen against the two rooks, and of course the queen is very strong. So big advantage for white there if black takes. So instead Caruana just starts defending, and yeah, this one gets very messy here very soon. King to c7 played to cover the b6 pawn, as well as start running away. But then e4, Nodirbek tries to now open things up, going after the f7 pawn, rook f8, queen f1. At this point, the players are both approaching really heavy time trouble, under 2 minutes. The time control for the rapid games is 25 plus 10. So they have the 10-second increment, but yeah, not a ton of time to go on. So here the game continues to be very messy. White ended up snagging this h3 pawn, but now c5. White's king here also starts feeling a little bit loose. A rook to c4. Some missed chances from both players, but eventually we'll get to just an incredibly interesting endgame. If a rook to g4, if takes, then queen takes c4. This one would be hanging. Tactics from both sides. a5, rook takes d4, takes, a takes b6, and now c4. King h3, and here it starts to feel like black is actually getting the initiative with two very strong passed pawns. But h5, white now gets their own passed pawn on the king side with h5. Now at this point, the engine was saying that rook to d7 is a winning move here, possibly with ideas of queen to d1 and looking to block white's queen or get white's queen off of the blockade. But instead, we saw rook takes b6, h6. Now we get into this very complicated queen and pawn endgame, where white's h-pawn is about to promote, but black has two passers, so black is an extra pawn, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot, as white's pawn is one step closer. So queen to e4, at this point things are very complicated. Apparently either queen to d1 or queen to d5 would hold this for black. So queen e4 also has the same idea as these moves, to try and get queen h1 check in case white promotes too quickly. But the engine is saying that the queen had to stay on the d file. For example, after queen to d1, white doesn't have anything better than a perpetual here. Because in the game, we see queen to e4, which is very, very logical, again, eyeing this h1 square. But here white has queen c5 check, queen e7 check, and queen d6 check. And this is a key check that white wouldn't have if black put the queen on one of these squares on the d file. In that case, black could then trade queens and promote one of their pawns out with e2 or c2. But here in the game, queen d6 check is allowed, and sooner or later, white is going to be able to snake the queen to the back rank with checks. And when the queen gets to the back rank, that means white can promote to a second queen and not have to worry about the queen h1 skewer. So that's the key point here. And Nodirbek figures this out with just a minute on his clock, that he has to get the queen to the back rank with checks. And now black can't really stop it. If king a7, for example, then queen c7 check, and then queen c8 is coming next. So Caruana also realizes this, decides to make a run for with king to b5. Probably a great practical decision, because now check king to c4. White does get the second queen, but at least black's king is active here and can support one of these pawns to promotion. So now queen h1 check. Caruana gives a couple checks here, queen f5, king h4, avoiding the blunder, king h6, queen g6 mate. That would be a big problem. So king h4 check and g4. The checks here soon run out because queen h1, there's king to g5. Instead, Caruana tries king to d3, looking to create counterplay in the time scramble with one of the pawns. And here white should be winning, but it's a matter of coordinating the two queens against black's single queen. So queen to b1 check. At this point, Nodirbek is winning. He goes queen to f1 check. Maybe queen e1 was a bit easier, just blockading the pawns and looking to get the other queen in with queen d8 next. Instead, we see queen f1, king d2, queen d8, the second queen comes in, and now queen to d5. Very clever move. If white trades here, then after e takes d5, white's queen is going to have a really hard time stopping both black's c and e pawns. And this one actually apparently is very unclear. And according to the engines, at least they don't see a clear win for white. But queen to c7, Nodirbek keeps us cool and finds a very nice move here. Queen c7, just keeping the pawn under control, not allowing black to promote. e2, Caruana tries, of course, most logical move. And now at this point, Nodirbek had to find a very precise winning move here, queen f2. Really hard to see this one, especially with seconds on your clock. But black apparently can't do anything here. This pawn is, of course, pinned. If black promotes c1 equals queen, this is really the key thing that white has to see, is that there's still queen f4 check to win this one, and white is winning. That's a tough one to spot in heavy time trouble. But after queen f2, it is winning. Black can try king to d1, but then queen to c3, covering the e1 square. And if queen to d2, then in this kind of position, white can actually go ahead and trade queens, as here white has a very nice mechanism of winning this endgame. I'll just show you folks. After queen d4 check, doesn't matter where the king runs, the queen is just going to be way too strong. So for example, king c1, queen e3 check, going after this one, king d1, queen d3 check, and now anywhere the king runs, it's going to be blocking one of the pawns, and then the queen can snag the other one. So king c1 takes, and from here the win is pretty simple. So this was the entire line that Nodirbek would have to find in order to win this game. 20 seconds on the clock. He probably didn't consider this move because of c1 equals queen. It's very hard to think about queen f2, then queen f4. So he ends up bailing out. Queen takes c2. Black has to take. Now queen takes e2. We end up in an equal queen and pawn endgame, where maybe white can actually fight for some advantage, especially if the king come in with king g5, king f6, going after this weak f7 pawn, and then trying to promote the g pawn. So this was Nodirbek, what he was counting on here. But king to c3, king to g5, and queen d8 check, very precise move. And it turns out white can't really make any progress here. If king h6, then just queen h8 check, and the king is going to be forced back. So after queen to d8, we basically just have a draw right away. King f4, queen d4 check, and the players ended up repeating here, and a draw was agreed. So super interesting game, super sharp endgame in the end, with the two queens eventually not being able to defeat the lone queen. The counterplay from black's c and e pawns ended up proving too difficult for white to handle. But yeah, super interesting game overall. Hopefully you folks enjoyed it, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the next one. Take care.